complex. I can't talk properly today. Hi Booktube, it's Marianne at Readathon Book, and today we are wrapping up the second half of February 2021. So we have reached the end of February. Had a couple of slumpy periods throughout the month, but I read 16 books in total this month. 13 of those were ebooks, 2 of them were audiobooks, and 1 of them were paperbacks. I read 3 taboo romances, 1 BDSM romance, 7 contemporary romance, 2 historical romance, 1 rockstar romance, and 1 mafia romance. I listened to 19 hours worth of audio and read 4,120 pages over Kindle and paperback, and my average rating for this month was 4.25. On to the books I read in the past 14 days. The first book I finished in the second half of February was Rapper's Delight by Kenya Goldie Bell. This one I gave 3 stars to, and it centres around the characters of Fade, who is a rapper, and Delight, who is a writer. Fade is Delightful's brother's best friend, and she had had a crush on him forever. When they were younger, they had sort of promised themselves to each other. Tragedy struck Delight's family, and the two haven't spoken to each other for 12 years due to misunderstanding and blame and miscommunication, etc. And they end up collaborating on a project, and the chemistry is still there between them, but obviously they both have resentment towards one another. And like I said, they haven't spoken to each other for over a decade, and there is a lot of blame and a lot of resentment and a lot of not so much hatred but dislike. So the two of them come together to work on this project, and they're getting closer to one another as time passes by. Like I said, the chemistry is still there, and the two of them end up intimate with each other. My issue with the book was I totally felt the sexual chemistry between the characters. I just wasn't sold on the feelings and the love aspect of it. I didn't feel the romance, I felt more of the lust than anything else. Content warnings for this book are gun violence and death of a family member. The next book I read this month was Loving Mr. Daniels by Britney C Cherry. I gave this one 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. This was the emotional roller coaster of a lifetime, and I don't think I've cried so much throughout a book since maybe The Fault in Our Stars, and that tore me to shreds. So the story is a teacher-student romance, but there's not a massive age gap between them. Both of them are of age, and there's only 3 years between them. So Ashlyn and Daniel meet at a bar. Ashlyn has just lost her sister, which isn't a spoiler because it happens right in the middle of the book, and Daniel has his own losses to deal with. The two of them pretty much had it off straight away, and they have this mutual love for Shakespeare. The two of them are total Shakespeare nerds, and I loved it. And they just have this instant connection, and then the next day she goes into her first class at a new school, and he is her teacher. So straight away he is like, no, we can't do this. It's not happening. But their relationship does evolve over the course of the book. I was 110% invested in the couple from the get-go. Even after you found out that he was the teacher, I was still here for it. I still wanted it to happen. Alongside that, you have family drama. She's got a fractured relationship with her dad, and she's also got a fractured relationship with her mum. So there's a lot of healing and things to do there. Daniel also has a fractured relationship with his brother, and again there's healing and things that he needs to work through there. There is a lot of tragedy in this book. Ashlyn's sister leaves her letters that she's written before she dies, and it's basically she has to open these letters after she's completed the tasks on the front. So it's things that she would normally do growing up, so getting drunk for the first time, falling in love for the first time. Every time she opened one of these letters, I was beside myself, just sobbing. It was so emotional, and I loved every bit of this story. The conflicts that happen in the book didn't feel overdone, even though there was so much tragedy happening on all sides. It didn't feel like there was too much. It just made you feel even more despair and even more empathy for Daniel and Ashlyn. At the end, I know I had said in my last video when I was talking about 2 weeks notice that I don't like massive time jumps, but there was a 5-year time jump at the end of this book, but it worked. It wasn't a case of there was this big massive time jump and there was no context for what had happened during that 5-year period. It was explained what both characters had been doing, and then we had the ending of the book. So some content warnings for Loving Mr. Daniels. There was gun violence, addiction and death of a family member, but I would not pass this book up. I have to buy myself a physical copy of the book because I would happily go back and read it over and over and over again. It's probably my favourite book that I read this month. I adored it. The next book that I read was Wanting Mr. Kane by Shanora Williams. This is an age gap romance with Dad's best friend, and I gave this one 3 stars. I wasn't a massive fan of this book. The story starts with Candy, who is 19, and Mr. Kane, who is her dad's best friend and is 15, 17 years older than her, something like that. And she has basically had a crush on him her whole life, and then decides that she's going to try and pursue a sexual relationship with him. Something just didn't sit right with me. There wasn't enough context as to whether he had been waiting for her to come of age, or if it had just been he had just discovered that she was attractive. So there was some sort of, unless I've just missed that when I've been reading it, so there was a level of discomfort there for me that I just didn't vibe with. I felt that Candy, the female character, was very immature. I just wasn't 100% sold. There was a massive cliffhanger at the end. I haven't yet read the next book in the series to find out how that cliffhanger plays out. I will probably go back to it at some point. It's just not what I'm looking for right now. It was okay, I enjoyed it. It just didn't hit right. It's just one of those things. You win some, you lose some. The next book I read this month was my joint favourite to Loving Mr. Daniels, and that was Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Harbour. I absolutely love this book. So, we have Chloe, who has fibromyalgia, and we have Red, who has suffered domestic abuse in his past and has some mental health issues that are alluded to in the story. I was invested in this relationship from the beginning. Oh my god, I loved it. So it explores chronic illness from a relationship perspective, which I really appreciated, because having a chronic illness myself and also suffering with chronic pain, it highlights the sort of complex dynamics that can arise when chronic illness and or chronic pain is an aspect to one person's life in a relationship. For me, who has a chronic illness and suffers with chronic pain, what I need is somebody that is understanding and communicative and just tries their best to not accommodate me, because I don't expect people to make allowances for me, but understand that there are limitations in place there, and that you can't be the same person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are going to be bad days. whether they are few and far between or whether they are regular, and you need someone there. Anyway, the plot of the story. So Redford is the superintendent of the building that Chloe lives in, and it's basically a hate to love kind of situation. So Chloe is grumpy due to her chronic illness. It's not actually that she has an issue with Red, but Red thinks that she's just not a very nice person. But he doesn't know at this point that she has a chronic illness and that her mood can be affected with the levels of pain that she is in and stuff like that. So Chloe finds a cat up a tree and she is attempting to climb up this tree and rescue it. And Red sort of stumbles upon her trying to rescue this cat. And it's the first time that they have a proper interaction, as in just sniping at each other as they pass each other in the building or having sort of small interactions. And it sort of goes from there. Chloe has this sort of bucket list, but as opposed to being a bucket list of things to do before she dies, it's a bucket list to help her get a life, because there's things that she's missed out on, either due to her chronic illness or just generally throughout her life. And she asks Red to kind of help her achieve the things that she has on this list. And from there begins such a wholesome romance. I loved this so much. The chemistry between them was fantastic. Everybody needs a Red in their life, whether they have chronic illness or not. He is so wholesome and so lovely, and he just wants to help everybody and do everything. There's a very strong sense of empathy, but he has things in his past that he has to heal from and come through. And like when I was talking about equivalent exchange in my last wrap up, he takes productive and healthy measures to overcome those issues. Chloe comes to terms with the fact that she can actually have love, even with her chronic illness, and I just loved everything about this. It was so good, it was so wholesome. There was upsetting parts of it. I did cry. The parts of it that were steamy were super hot, and I will ship this forever. I can't wait to read Take a Hint Danny Brown, because if it is anything like Get a Life Chloe Brown, I'm here for it. What I loved as well about the chronic illness element, it wasn't used as a sort of plot device to make you feel sorry for a character, the way that some illnesses or disabilities can be used. It was a part of her life, but it didn't define her as a person, and focus more on the dynamics around family, friends, and relationships with regards to the chronic illness, if that makes sense. Also, it is body positive, and I liked that from a domestic abuse aspect. It highlighted the dynamic where in a domestic abuse situation it's not always the male that is perpetrating the abuse, because I think a lot of the time it's kind of overlooked. So content warnings for Get a Life Chloe Brown, domestic abuse. This was lovely, it was wholesome, I gave it 5 stars and I loved it. After reading Get a Life Chloe Brown, I decided to go on a Britney C Cherry binge, and I've pretty much found the definition of masochism, because I have allowed Britney C Cherry to rip my guts out, stomp on my heart, and yet keep going back for more. So I started reading the Element series. The Element series is a set of 4 standalone books, so you don't have to read them in order. So I read the first 2 and then the last one, and then I've got 1 left to read. So the first one was The Air He Breathes, and I gave this one 5 stars. We have Tristan and Elizabeth. Both of them have extreme losses in their lives and are healing from these losses. Tristan is the typical grumpy neighbour, puts up this cold exterior, doesn't want to let people in, and Elizabeth tries to befriend him and speak to him and form a friendship with him. And the way that the friendship progresses into an intimate relationship, they kind of fall into one another and use each other to forget their losses instead of being intimate with each other as people, if that makes sense. So that creates a kind of unhealthy coping mechanism there. But then as time passes, they kind of really see each other for who they are, and the romance blossoms from there. It is absolutely beautiful. Again, it was extremely emotional. I sobbed when I was reading this book. You see this softer side to Tristan that is coming out over time. He does such sweet things. The relationship between Tristan and Elizabeth's daughter is so pure and so wholesome, and I loved this book. There are some coincidences in the book, and to be perfectly honest with you, I kind of saw them coming, but I didn't mind it. It wasn't one of those things where you've seen it coming and then you read it and go, well, knew that was going to happen. I was wanting to see how it was going to unfold, to see if my suspicions were correct. And the way it unfolded, you do need to take into the whole suspension of belief situation, because the coincidences were very coincidental, but it made for such a lovely, beautiful, endearing story, and I just loved it. Content warnings for the air he breathes are loss of a partner and loss of a child. Britney C Cherry's books are extremely emotionally taxing. So if you don't like crying till you have a headache, maybe read one and then take a break to read something lighter. But apparently I was on a path of self-destruction. The next book I read was The Fire Between High and Low by Britney C Cherry again, and I gave this one 3 stars, but I'm thinking it might be more of a 4-star. I'm not sure. So we have Logan and Alyssa, who grew up together and are best friends. Logan has a really tough family life with regards to his mum and his dad and just the circumstances that he is in. And Alyssa has kind of grew up in a more affluent household. Again, the family dynamics aren't great in there, but she is sort of better off than Logan. But the two of them find each other anyway and become best friends, and they start to develop feelings for each other. And it was a very sweet kind of romance that unfolded. Like, they knew each other so well and loved each other so deeply as friends that it wasn't a massive transition for them to develop a romantic relationship with one another. But unfortunately the story doesn't go on such a positive path the whole way through. Again, like the previous 2 Britney C Cherry books, there are tragedy, there are problems that come along the way. There were parts of the story that affected triggers of mine, which added to the emotional destruction. The thing that brought this down to a 4-star or 3-star, I'm going to have to think about this and then maybe readjust, was the fact that we had a 5-year time jump. I feel that there was too much forgiveness. Unlike The Air He Breathes and Loving Mr. Daniels, where there was all of this tragedy and trauma, but it all worked together, there was too much. I think that The Fire Between High and Low had too many elements of trauma and upset and damage that were happening, that it was really busy, as there was a lot happening and it felt a bit overwhelming at times. And you kind of thought for Logan, like, how much trauma can one person possibly be put through? Another thing that bothered me slightly was at the very end there was a little surprise thrown in, but I can't go into too much detail because it kind of spoils it. but there is a person who has been going through changes that just appears at the end, and there's no really any context for how this fractured relationship develops after the end. It's just that is kind of the end of the book. But yeah, it was really good. I just didn't love it. I loved their friendship, and I love how elements of the friendship had been brought into the relationship. I believe that any relationship built on a solid foundation of friendship and trust is likely to be successful. I would still recommend it to people. Trigger warnings for the fire between low and high: miscarriage, domestic abuse, addiction, parental abuse, and I think that's it. And the last book I read in February, Gravity Between Us by Britney C Cherry, and I gave this one 5 stars as well. So we have Lucy and Graham. Lucy is this very loving, kind, giving person. She is a florist, and she has a very close relationship with one of her sisters and a very distant relationship with her other sister. Graham is a best-selling thriller author who Lucy is a big fan of. He is very sort of closed off to everybody. He is convinced that everybody in his life just leaves him, so he doesn't like feelings, and he's in a sort of marriage / relationship where there's no love there, there's no connection there, they're both convenient for each other. So Lucy meets Graham at a funeral that she is providing the flowers for, and there's like some good banter between the two of them, even though he's kind of shut off, like there is some banter between them. And then there is a plot twist comes into it. Lucy steps in to help Graham raise his daughter, because she feels she has an obligation because reasons. Again, can't really say what the reasons are because it's a spoiler. Graham and Lucy develop this lovely dynamic. You can see their relationship blossoming along the way. The dynamic between Lucy and Graham's daughter is beautiful. The book is a pure example that biological love, like, you don't need to be biologically related to somebody to feel true unconditional love for them. So there wasn't as much tragedy as there was in the other Britney C Cherry books, but it was very impactful. I loved Graham and Lucy's relationship. I loved seeing him softening up the way that Tristan did in The Air He Breathes. Brings down these walls and allows somebody in and allows himself to love and have love and accept that everybody's not going to leave him. And also how being a parent can change you as a person for the better. Content warnings for The Gravity Between Us: premature birth, parental abuse, domestic abuse, death of a parent, and I think that's it. Oh, cheating. But not the main characters. So that was everything that I read in the second half of February. I think that going into March, once I've finished my March TBR, I will be going back in to binge more Britney C Cherry. I think I found possibly a new favourite author. Her books aren't just, they're not just romances. There are other elements brought in, whether it be family, friends. Like I said, it's not something, our books are not something I would recommend if you can't handle being upset by your reading material, because they're very heavy. But the relationships that she sort of creates are just beautiful, and you become invested in these characters. And not only that, but they're really well written as well. They're easy to read, they're well put together, they're well constructed. The conflict and resolution that happens in our romances are done really well. Like I said, sometimes she can be a bit heavy-handed with the tragedy, but it works. I think she manages to pull together the perfect balance of steaminess, romance, friendship, family, everything. It is just, they're just amazing. So I am going to sign this off with a little piece of advice. Not advice. February isn't the only month that you should be reading Black authors. You should be trying to read diversely the whole year. Don't just read Black authored books to prove that you are a good person. Read diversely, because if you are focusing exclusively on books written by people like you that only contain people like you, you are going to miss out some beautifully written stories. You're going to miss out on dynamics that might not be included in the books that you are reading already, cultures that you are not reading already. So yeah, Black authors aren't just for February. So keep going. I know that sounded completely patronising, and I'm not trying to speak for other people. It's just me speaking to my fellow readers as a reader, and yeah, that's how I feel. So stay safe, happy reading, and I'll speak to you later. Bye!